As always, donate to Jumpstart. Jumpstart helps economically disadvantaged kids play team sports, which is something that's near and dear to Rachel and I's hearts. So if you go to the links in this description below, pretty much all the information that you will need to donate is there. So we really encourage you, if you can, to do so. Again, it's a great cause. We love Jumpstart. They are our charity of choice. If you can, please donate.
It is not a drinking podcast today. It is a girlies podcast. We are welcoming Lyss back to the show. My girl, how are you?
I'm doing so much better now that I'm here. I am so psyched that Mikey Stevens is deathly ill because that means I get to jump on the show with you.
There we go. We have so much to chat about. We are literally going to chat Chel Chit Chat, which is Lyss's new show. And if you haven't listened to it, I don't do a ton of listening to hockey podcasts anymore. Like, I'll be honest, I barely listen to like 32 Thoughts. Chel Chit Chat is appointment listening for me. So if you haven't checked it out, it is a really cool spin on hockey, and we're going to chat about it and all the things that Lyss did to like put it together, the people she talked to, and what she learned. But like, most importantly, go listen to it because it's not your typical hockey podcast, and I freaking love it. But we're so back. The girlies are back. We're not talking about royal weddings today. So last week, we did an after the final rose version of Trade Deadline. We now need to talk and do a debrief on how those trades are going, because some of them are not going very well. But what team do you cover?
Winnipeg Jets.
And we gonna talk about the Jets. We gonna talk about them. All right, so let's dive right in. Trade deadline, early returns. Let's start with the Jets, because I feel like the Jets are a cup contender, and generally speaking, they were definitely the quietest at the deadline, especially when you consider what Colorado and Dallas decided to pop off and do. But you watch every Jets game, you cover the team. Give me how's the fit between Brandon Tanev and the Winnipeg Jets? Now that it's kind of like going back to your ex, like, you know how like Ari Lyondike literally like got engaged to Becca and then was like, nope, and then went back to Lauren. The Winnipeg Jets literally lost Brandon Tanev, and then were like, we actually want him back.
Well, I feel like it works out perfectly, and it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more of a like, I was gonna say a Ben Affleck, Jennifer Lopez thing, because it's like, but it's not that, because they keep getting back together and whatnot. But it's like, I think it worked out for the best. Like, when they parted ways, when the Jets and Brandon Tanev parted ways, I think it was okay. He had a really good season, and he was going to hit that free agency market and go somewhere and make money that the Winnipeg Jets could not and should not afford to pay him. And when he signed with the Pittsburgh Penguins, I was okay with not taking that contract on here in Winnipeg. And then he went to Seattle, and now he's here, and he's on the butt end of a contract. And is it a little bit more money than a guy who's playing on your fourth line is worth? Perhaps, but he knows the players, he knows the city, he knows the team. The systems have enough similarity as they did when he played here that, you know, there's some familiarity with the play styles of the guys that he's with. And let's be honest, who doesn't want a freak like that in their bottom six? So I'm pretty happy with the fit here. It's been really fun, and a lot of fans really like him. I think, you know, that it's the type of fit on the team that brings people together and gets them excited to watch some of the more depth pieces in the lineup and whatnot. Like, you get excited when the fourth line gets out there just because you never really know what he's going to do. So all in all, as an isolated piece of the trade deadline, I liked the fit from day one, and it's worked out the exact way that personally I thought it was going to.
It feels like the Tanev to Winnipeg thing is the exact same thing as the Yanni Gourde back to Tampa thing, where it's one of those things where you hear GMs talk all the time about not wanting to upset the continuity of their locker room. Like, you saw Washington literally do nothing except Anthony Beauvillier at the deadline, which is very much just like a bottom of the lineup piece. Meanwhile, like, we have other organizations uprooting their entire top lines. But it kind of felt like Kevin Cheveldayoff said, okay, if I'm going to acquire guys, and obviously no trade clauses come into factor here, but Brandon Tanev, we know he fits in the locker room. We know he plays well in Winnipeg. He's also, quite literally, when you think about a guy who can fire up the whiteout in the playoffs, that guy, Adam Lowry, like, they can just do stuff that makes fans go nuts and gets those towels crazy. Like, I think part of the calculation here, very similar to Yanni Gordon Tampa, is we know this guy's a fit. We know this guy is a fan favorite when he was here in the past. Let's just bring him in because we know he's not going to screw up what we're doing. I loved that deal. I was kind of hoping selfishly that he would go to the Leafs. I still think that that's a possibility in the offseason, given that his brother plays for the Leafs. But I thought it was a fantastic acquisition for the Jets. Like, it's one of those just, like, perfect fit Cinderella slipper type situations.
Yeah, I like it a lot for them, and you know, I think that it's the sort of move. The Yanni Gord example, I think, is perfect, because that's way better than Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. I was going a little bit off the board with that one, but the continuity thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because I find it fascinating that, like you said, the two best teams in the NHL right now, the Washington Capitals and the Winnipeg Jets, were two of the quietest in terms of contenders at the deadline. But I think that there is some merit to that, especially when there are certain teams that are, let's be real, kind of powered by the power of friendship, as in these are teams that no one was expecting to be fighting for the President's Trophy at this stage in the season, in the off season, and you kind of have to go with what's working in those particular instances. Do I think the Winnipeg Jets could have done more? Yes. Do I think the Winnipeg Jets tried to do more? Yes, they absolutely did, and they were on the record saying that, so I do get that to an extent, but there's a difference between them and someone like a Colorado Avalanche, who kind of had their cards dealt for them with that Mikko Rantanen situation, and it's the sort of thing where it's like, well, if you're going to shake up the core, let's kind of go crazy with this and kind of, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall, get some more guys in here and shake this up, because it's already being shaken up. And you could say a similar thing about the Dallas Stars with the Rantanen piece and, you know, Heiskanen being out and knowing that they have to make some changes. For the Jets and the Caps, like, I don't know, I think those kind of, for lack of better terms, personality hires aren't necessarily the wrong move to take when you have a team that's working as well as they are because of chemistry and team structure and playing really strong details as a unit, as opposed to just, like, you know, 3 or 4 stars pulling you through to, like, really awesome victories and whatnot. Like, this is a very team-oriented situation right now for both the Jets and the Caps, so it makes a lot of sense to me that they don't necessarily land or need the bigger ticket items.
Right. I thought that, so they acquired Luke Shen, and, like, shout out to Kyle Dubas for that piece of arbitrage, trading, like, getting more than he traded for Luke Shen literally like a week and a half later. I thought that they would have been able to land Braden Shen after they got Luke, because Luke has another year left on his deal, and I believe Braden has 2 after this. And it turned out that Braden Shen was like, nah, I don't want to go, and I was kind of like, all right. I mean, you look at St. Louis now and you're like, all right, I could see that. He's the captain of the team, kind of wants to stick it out. Can't really blame him for that. Thought he would have been the perfect second line center for the Jets, at least, like, on this run. And the Jets, I don't want to sit here and blame Kevin Shoveldayoff, because, like you said, I think there were other factors at play as to why they couldn't land Braden Shen or Brock Nelson. But now Gabe Vilardi is out, and it's pretty serious. How big is the issue now that the Jets weren't able to swing bigger, or didn't maybe overpay a little bit for some of those guys? Because Vilardi, like, that's a playoff guy. That's a pretty key piece. Does that kind of loom large now for the Jets?
Yeah, the opinion I try and take with this is that I don't think that, you know, when a star player goes down with an unexpected injury, that people should be too revisionist about the trade deadline. If you didn't like the trade deadline for the Jets beforehand, that's valid, and I think that you can continue with that now. But I don't think that, you know, if you were like, oh, this was good, and then now that Gabe Vilardi's hurt, you're like, oh, holy smokes, like, Kevin Shoveldayoff screwed up. It's kind of like the other day, the Winnipeg Jets were playing against the Edmonton Oilers, and Connor McDavid left the game with an injury. And it's like, okay, if Connor McDavid all of a sudden was, like, out for the season from that, do you turn around and look at the GM and say, oh my gosh, you screwed up this trade deadline. Why didn't you find someone to replace Connor McDavid? It's like, there are certain guys, like the New Jersey Devils with the Jack Hughes thing, where it's like, you're screwed, for lack of better terms, right? And so that's kind of how I feel about this particular situation. I felt that there was more, you know, a player with upside was needed at that trade deadline, and they did not acquire it, and I think that was a miss, and I don't, like you, want to necessarily lay blame on Kevin Shoveldayoff. My opinion is that if he didn't dangle his first, even after losing out on Brock Nelson, I think that's a miss, but we don't know what he did after he lost out on that trade in those 24 hours between when that trade went down and when the trade deadline finished. But all in all, of course it looks worse now that a star player is kind of out, but I don't think that that's something you can necessarily plan for or expect to happen, because Gabe Vilardis don't grow on trees, and you're not expecting to lose star pieces like that, and you can't always plan for insurance in that same capacity. So the hole is glaring in the spot that Gabe Vilardi leaves in the lineup, that's for sure, but I don't know if any behaviors leading up to it could have prevented that or minimized that to the same degree that they were still requiring to minimize a hole like that beforehand.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair assessment, right? It's like, if you liked the deadline and then Vilardi got hurt and you're like, oh, I don't like the deadline now, then like you're out of bounds with that, because no. But if you said right off the hop that like they didn't get enough and I'm worried because a single injury
and now you're like,
really
see?
Screw them. I literally was like, I told you. Like, that's literally exactly it. One guy I'd love the Jets to go after. And I think, and we're going to have a conversation about Winnipeg right now, but like one of the things I think Winnipeg could do is target players under control, right? It's very obvious that they are not going to get the guys like Brock Nelson or Braden Shen who have a choice, right? I mean, there's more than a few other teams on that list. For some reason, Edmonton is on that list, and I'm like, I don't know about you, I could survive Edmonton if I knew that I was playing with McDavid and Draisaitl and they just lost in the cup final. Like, feel like at some point I want to win a cup more than anything else. But generally speaking, players that are UFAs don't necessarily want to come to Winnipeg. And when you compare them to other cities around the league, I can understand that. But what I think the Jets could do, a guy like Trevor Zegras, who it kind of seems is like nobody really knows what's happening in Anaheim. And I don't necessarily think it's Zegras' fault. I think it falls more on Pat Verbeek than anything else. If I were Winnipeg, that's a guy that's controlled for like the next like 4 or 5 years. I think acquiring somebody like that would be perfect for the Jets, because they have the assets to do it. If you have the assets for Braden Shen, you have the assets for Trevor Zegras. And so I think that there's something where maybe Kevin Cheveldayoff should start. Like, yeah, you like your veteran presence, but I think starting to target guys that can exercise that control would be something that they should look into. Another example that I thought about, and it's only because his name was inexplicably in trade rumors, and it was outrageous that it was, but Elias Pettersson could have been a Jet because he doesn't have trade protection until July 1st. And so that's somebody where it's like, if you want to aim high, like a 1-2 punch of Mark Scheifele and Elias Pettersson looks pretty freaking good if you're a Jets fan. So I don't know if there's like a strategy thing that maybe the Jets need to adjust for. But maybe let's talk about the like Winnipeg and why players don't necessarily want to go there, and what the hell that guy said on social media the other day.
Well, before we get into that, I will speak to the point that you just brought up, which I think is extremely important. And when people talk about, like, I think there's an extension of this whole Winnipeg not trading their first in a year where they're first in their conference sort of situation that is important to address, which is that, you know, you have a guy like Nikolai Ehlers who's a pending unrestricted free agent, and if I had to place my chips right now on whether or not he's a Jet come, you know, next September and October, the answer is no for me. I don't think that the parties are going to agree on something. I think that he's going to explore the open market, and I think he's going to make money somewhere else. And I think that it's important for people to realize that you can't just go turn around and sign another Nikolai Ehlers, because another Nikolai Ehlers is going to sign in Florida, is going to sign in Los Angeles, right? So you need to keep a little bit of those trade asset pieces for the offseason as well, in ways that other teams can address with open market deals. You need to address through trade. And it sounds a bit, you know, silly and maybe maniacal to say it, but like, you need to bring guys here kind of against their will, for lack of better terms. And then what happens is you get the guys like the Gabe Vilardis of the world who are traded as RFAs and as part of, you know, packages or whatever, and they bridge because they have to bridge, because that's what you do when you're a young player, and they spend a couple seasons here, and they'll look you in the eye and they'll say, yeah, can't wait to extend here long term because I actually love it. You know, there is an element of, you know, when it comes to Winnipeg, you kind of have to be there to love there kind of thing. People who have spent a lot of time here do grow to love the city, and for a lot of different reasons, and there are benefits to living and playing in a place like this, but it's really hard to communicate that to people unless they spend some time here. So trading for guys like a Luke Shen who has a little bit of extra time, someone like Luke Shen, you know, perhaps nearing closer to the end of his career and would love to go chase another cup, a year and a bit with the best team in the West. Like, a lot of guys are open to making moves like that, regardless of kind of what the repercussions might be after that. And who knows, you know, Luke Shen could fall in love with the city during his time here, because lots of guys have done it before. Winnipeg Jets have done a really good job of signing a lot of the really big name guys like Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, stuff like that, to long-term deals after they've spent some time here, right? They're not signing 7-year deals on opening July 1st, but guys are willing to spend their careers here because after you do spend some time here, you get to understand why people love it so much.
Well, I think that's such a great point, because you look at it and the core of the Jets, Nikolai Ehlers aside, and I think you and I both agree that he's maybe not been treated very well by some coaches in Winnipeg in terms of his utilization, and that is probably a factor here. But Mark Scheifele is going to play his entire career as a Jet. Connor Hellebuck is going to play his entire career as a Jet. Kyle Connor is going to play his entire prime as a Jet. Josh Morrissey is going to play his entire prime as a Jet. Like, when you're drafted there and you actually see what Winnipeg has to offer, like, don't get me wrong, I'm one of those people. If you said you could choose between moving to New York City and Winnipeg, I'm gonna choose Manhattan, obviously. Like, of course. But the Jets have something that not a lot of other teams do, and that is they have top-notch ownership. Like, Mark Chipman and David Thompson are not short on money. And don't let anybody tell you that they are. They're not short on money. But from all accounts, and I've talked to players around the league, the way the Jets treat their players, and you saw this last week, Luke Shen hasn't seen his family since he was traded, and the Jets had like 3 or 4 days between games, and the Jets paid for Luke Shen to fly on a private jet to see his family for 2 days. What other owners are going to be willing to do that? And if you have an owner that's like doing that, as opposed to, let's say, I don't know, Eugene Melnick, for example, or James Dolan, for example, I would much rather play for Mark Chipman and David Thompson than I would for some of the other owners, Francesco Aquilini being one of them. I have worked for him. Like, Lyss, let me just tell you, Vancouver, beautiful city. If you put a gun to my head and said you had to go live in Winnipeg winter, or you had to go live in Vancouver and you had to work for either Aquilini or Chipman and Thompson, do you know how fast my bags would be packed for Winnipeg? Like, I would be in Winnipeg so quick. And that is what I feel like NHL players do not understand, is the impact of having an owner that actually gives a damn about you is really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, because there are some people that would, you know, venture to say that Mark Chipman is almost too involved in the hockey operation side of things. Like, you want to talk about a guy that, you know, hockey as a sport and as a community as opposed to just a business. Like, I go to Winnipeg's practice facility that's outside of the city. You know, it's about 30 minutes from downtown, where they have their development camps in the summer. And Mark Chipman's there in his sandals with his Go cup of coffee and his coffee mug, talking to folks outside of the rink, because, you know, what else would you be doing at 9 a.m. on a Saturday? Like, that's a guy who's involved in every aspect of the hockey level things. And I give kudos to the Winnipeg Jets for acknowledging that they can't act like a James Dolan. They can't act like, you know, some of these other folks who have different benefits baked into the nature of the circumstance they live in. And I think Winnipeg understands that the uniqueness of its market is that they can afford to do exactly that with paying attention to folks and giving them the time of day in that regard. But also the fact that it's a hockey market to its core. If you're someone who loves hockey and, like, you know, has grown up with the idea of being able to walk to a random outdoor rink one day and have every kid turn and look at you and say, oh my gosh, it's a third liner on the Winnipeg Jets. I have your jersey. Can I get your autograph? That's going to happen in Winnipeg. Any guy on the Winnipeg Jets shows up at any rink in the city of Winnipeg at any time, most of the people there will know who they are, and you can't say the same about that in a lot of other markets. Some folks might want more privacy, or they might want more flexibility to do other stuff. That's fair, to each their own. But if you're someone who is kind of like that Canadian hockey in your veins sort of thing, it's the place to be for that exact reason that you said, and those other symptoms as well.
Yeah, like, I mean, if you play for the Rangers, like, obviously, if you're Henrik Lundqvist, you're not walking down the street without people recognizing you. But, like, if you're a third-line player, you are behind the Yankees, the Mets, the Giants, the Jets. Like, there are multiple other teams, like, walking down the street if it's Matt Rempe and, like, a bullpen pitcher for the New York Yankees, they're recognizing the bullpen pitcher. You know what I mean? Like, even outside of
Absolutely.
Like, even if Lafreniere was walking down the street and he was chilling and, like, the shortstop for the Yankees was walking down the street at the same time, or, like, the backup QB, like, if Tommy DeVito, who's the third-string QB for the Giants, was walking down the street, he would get more recognition than Alexi Lafreniere would for the Rangers. Whereas, like, when you're in Winnipeg, it's the Jets, and, like, to a degree, the Blue Bombers, but, like, let's face it, it's the Jets. In the same way that in Montreal, you could be an AHL player for the Habs, and you are not going anywhere without anybody noticing. Like, straight up, you're not, right? And I actually think that there are some players that don't like that, but there are some players that thrive on that. And if you thrive on that, and you like that sort of vibe, Winnipeg is a great place to be, because you're never going to get harassed. The people in Winnipeg are so nice. Like, it's almost like East Coasters from that perspective. Like, they're super nice. Which is why I want to talk about that. Snapback Sports went to Winnipeg. And I haven't seen all the videos. I saw one. But boy howdy, are you not going to show up in a city for 3 days and just trash it like you've lived there for months. Like, if I wanted to trash Vancouver, and I'm not going to because it's a great city, I lived there for months. I can do that because I did other things. You show up to a city for 3 days, unless you get straight up mugged, you don't get to have an opinion on the city.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple videos that circulated around kind of that time with people having their opinions, and opinions is a word I hold in an interesting regard, because if you come to Winnipeg and have a bad experience, you're in your right to say, I had a bad experience in my 2 days here. What you don't have the right to do is say, and it wasn't the snapback guy, it was the other guy. There was some other dude who was also kind of in the same, he came to the same game, I don't know where he's from, somewhere in the US, I think he's from somewhere on the East Coast, and say things like, oh, the people of Winnipeg are struggling economically, the city of Winnipeg is struggling economically. You don't get to say, well, the ownership group does this. Well, you don't get to say all these sorts of things. Like, you can say that, you can frame things in terms of how your experience was and what your frame of reference is and how you felt. But that's the problem with a lot of men who are content creators who haven't been humbled enough in their careers that they speak things
Clearly.
in fact when it's not a fact. And I think that's what I struggle with so much with these particular parts, in saying that, oh, well, the city's not going to have a team in 5 years. Like, there is so much nuance, and I could speak about the city of Winnipeg and the province of Manitoba for hours and hours and hours, because it is such a unique place because of the fact that the epicenter of the province of Manitoba is the only city that has over 100,000 people for the entirety of the province. You know, I made a video about this, so if you watch my video, I apologize for the repetition. You can't go somewhere with over 1 million people. It takes you 8 hours to drive to the closest place with over 1 million people. So Winnipeg is a central hub that has all the things you could possibly need, yet pulls from nowhere else around it. It is such a strange place, but there's so much depth to the layers of what's available in the city of Winnipeg, because they cannot rely on neighboring cities for things to the same degree that other places, even in like the GTA can, or places even in Calgary and Edmonton, there's some resource sharing that can exist between those different cities. And I can't speak to them from a firsthand experience, but like I said, like from my own experience and from what I know from living here for my entire life, like there is so much depth to the city of Winnipeg, its relationship with its hockey team, the ownership group, and how the hockey team belongs to the ownership group in the same capacity that its, real estate organization does, and how it's super ingrained in this rejuvenation of downtown that True North is kind of spearheading. Like, there's so much going on, and to go on and make a 1-minute video after spending 3 days here and saying this is what the city of Winnipeg is, as opposed to this is how I feel about the city of Winnipeg, is just ridiculously frustrating. 10 out of 10 rage bait if that's what they're going for, because man, oh man, is it frustrating to hear people say this is how things are when they just simply don't know how things are.
Well, like, and it's one thing if, like, we're Canadian, right? It's one thing if, like, I'm someone who's been to almost every major city in Canada. If I want to say, okay, compared to Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, Charlottetown, Edmonton, Calgary, XYZ, Winnipeg, XYZ. When did a dude on TikTok get his degree in economics, number one, but number two, what are the odds that a man from the East Coast of the United States of America knows anything about the Winnipeg economy? I am willing to put that at 0. There is 0% chance of that happening unless that guy works at BlackRock in Manhattan. And if he worked at BlackRock in Manhattan, he wouldn't be making TikToks.
Well, it's always the bit, right? That it's like when people, it's like, well, if you were XYZ, then you can make this video. But it's a catch-22 because it's like, if someone were XYZ, they would never make a video like this kind of thing, Like, that's always the bit.
But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you can say my experience was bad. I lived in Newark, New Jersey, where there was a gang war happening for 3 months in a hotel where my parents had to hire private security for me while I lived there because I got mugged 3 times. So I am entitled to say I don't like the city of Newark because A, I got mugged 3 times, B, I heard gunshots almost every night, and C, I wasn't even allowed to go outside without private security because it was that dangerous. That is a lived experience, but at no point will you ever hear me say, the restaurants are bad, the economy is bad, the XYZ, this. First of all, 3 of my favorite restaurants in the entire New York area are in Newark, which is obviously not ideal for safety reasons, but the little holes in the wall are absolutely incredible. And it's like one of those things where it's like, if you haven't lived or spent an enormous amount of time somewhere where you're actually familiar with people, and I'm not talking about you asked 2 people on the street for directions or you went to 4 bars. That doesn't count, because in Toronto, people are like, people at the bars are so mean. I'm like, the people at the bars in Toronto are not actually from Toronto. You will not see that.
What I always say when I go places is I try and explain something in terms of, like, my opinion as a tourist versus my opinion of living somewhere, because, like, I completely understand if someone's like, I don't want a vacation in Winnipeg. I'm like, okay, that's fine by me, whatever. But if someone's like, it's a bad place to live, holy smokes, am I going to question your, perspective on that if it's based on your experience here kind of as a tourist, right? Because I think it's so important to acknowledge the difference between those sorts of things. Is Winnipeg nightlife super awesome? Absolutely not. This is an ongoing problem. There is not a lot going on. The city of the downtown area
a club.
Is not always.
It's the girly pop club.
Oh my gosh, dude! If
I open a bar in Winnipeg,
I think I could start such a good bar in Winnipeg, but that's another conversation. But living somewhere is very different from visiting somewhere, and I say that with my full chest. So I always say, like, Toronto, one of my favorite places to visit. Can I speak to what it's like to live there? Absolutely not, and I never will speak to that until I live there, right? Because it's always a different experience when you go somewhere knowing that you're going to be there temporarily versus knowing you're going to be there long term.
Exactly. And, like, honestly, New York for me is the best example, like Manhattan. I love to go to Manhattan. I have spent a lot of time there. If I had to live above Times Square for the rest of my life, I would not function. Like, first, like, absolutely not. I live like half an hour outside of Manhattan, and it's great because you're close enough to go in. Like, Nick and I go and watch Broadway, or we went to a concert last week. Like, we can do that. We can go to the Garden whenever we want. Like, there's this cool Rangers apparel that we both want to get because, like, he's a Rangers fan, but the Rangers apparel doesn't actually have the logo. It just has a giant R on it, which, like, suits me given what my name is. And so we're like, oh, we'll just like go in and grab it. So we're close enough to do that, but like far enough away that we don't deal with like the crap. And it's like, that's kind of the perfect medium, but you're like, I'm not going to sit here and say like, I want to live in New York City. Like, I think your point about being a tourist versus living there are two very different things. I have friends who live all over New York City, and like, there's certain places where I'm like, yeah, like I could probably live there, but then there's certain places where I'm like, I don't even want to go there, never mind live there. Like, you know what I mean?
Right, and I think, you saying that you don't want to live in Manhattan is very, you're saying that based on XYZ thing. You didn't go to Manhattan as a tourist, sit in Times Square, and be like, oh, based on this, I'm going to formulate my opinion of whether or not I want to live there. Like, no, it's a very, very different thing. Like, so I think it's so important, and that's what... I think there is some nuance to that conversation. If you want to talk about, like, hockey players, going and signing somewhere for 8 years is different than, being a trade deadline acquisition. I completely agree with that for those exact same logic and reasons that I mentioned for this tourist versus living thing. It's the same sort of situation, and that's why I always say that if, you're a pending UFA, you should be willing to be traded to 31 NHL teams if it means you're going to have a chance at winning a cup. It just means 3 months somewhere else. Like, I genuinely believe to my core that most of them also agree with me. I feel like a lot of players would be willing to go pretty much anywhere in the league knowing they have a contract expiration coming up.
Are a player and you're not willing to go somewhere for 3 months to potentially win a cup, I have two thoughts on that. One, you don't want to win a cup badly enough. And two, you're not tough. If you want to wax poetic about hockey players being these emotionally tough human beings and your ass can't survive in a city for 3 months, you're not tough.
And
like,
especially
you are
because the criticisms are always of, like, the weather in, like, Edmonton and Calgary and Winnipeg and whatever. It's like the 3 months are also in April. Like, you'll live. Yes, I promise. I walked outside in a t-shirt today.
Okay, in fairness, I genuinely think this is like this is not a Canada problem. I obviously have spent a lot of time in the US over the past few months. When I was younger, I played in a hockey tournament in Pittsburgh. Must have been like 13 or 14. We played this team, and we were like in this hotel. So we had played them, and then they were like hanging out. And they're from, I want to say they were from like outside of Dallas, so like far away. They're like, oh, so what's it like to have snow 12 months a year? And I'm like, what? I live in
we wouldn't know.
Toronto.
Google's
we
free.
We have 4 seasons. Like, and this is the thing, it's like, there are legit ass people in the US that think that all of Canada just has snow all the time. And it's like, no. So I could totally see how these people think Winnipeg, just basically like, you live in an igloo. And it's like, okay, think of Toronto like New York or Boston. We have the same weather pattern. It's the same
Exactly.
thing.
No, literally.
Think of Winnipeg like Minnesota. It's the same thing. But, okay,
no,
so
absolutely. And that's actually one thing that people love about living in Winnipeg and Canada in general is just the concept of seasons. That's exactly it, right? Yeah. Like, just the idea of, like, watching the leaves turn, watching the snow fall, and having snow on Christmas, and then watching everything sprout again in the spring, and then, having those plus 40 degrees Celsius days out by the pool. Like, you get all of that, which I think is really cool. Is it annoying for, like, gardening and wardrobe choices? Yeah,
and
of course. But I think there's some huge benefits to that. But again, you only have to do that for X number of months in the year.
So the whole reason we had to have this conversation is because as a society, and like, boy howdy do we live in a society right now.
We do in fact live in a society.
There is this addiction to doom scrolling, to toxic content, whereas like, I opened my TikTok yesterday, Lyss, and there was this viral video of this author sitting there and, like, no one was buying his book. And so this lady made a TikTok being like, I feel so bad. And now it's, like, the top-selling book on Amazon. And it turns out this guy is, like, the nicest human being. And all he wants to do is, like, help kids reach their dreams. And I'm like, well, you're adorable. It's like, why can't we have that content? Why is it that when people go to make content, like, the people who made those videos about Winnipeg, what is it about society where we're like, yeah, I want to watch that content? Like, as a society, we need to be better. We need to be like, you know what? We need to ignore these people because they're toxic, they're negative, and all it does is go contribute to this vicious cycle of toxic negativity and, quite frankly, toxic masculinity, which is a giant issue we're having right now.
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of those things. I can never be normal about anything. I always have to, like, discuss its deeper meaning and discuss if there's, like, a conspiracy to be had there. But I do think there's also a huge problem right now with, like, education. This is, like, a crazy rabbit hole I'm gonna go down.
Yes.
But in terms of, like, specifically language and linguistics, like, I think a lot of people are struggling to acknowledge the nuance in language and how you present ideas and how you present conversations, and in that, you know, so many people are refusing to have any form of, you know, interest in conversing with people who disagree with them on certain things. But it's formed, that opinion, because people present opinions in forms of fact, and people present opinions in forms of, I don't want to be educated, I just want to tell you you're wrong. And I don't think you need to be receptive to that sort of thing. But again, how did we get here? I don't really know. But we're in this cycle right now of nobody wants to learn, and nobody wants to be told that they're wrong, and everyone thinks that they need to have an opinion on everything, and people are scared of people knowing more about them and certain things, and just this weird loop of people then, because of all this, saying whatever they feel like, and then expecting people to, you know, it's like the Eric Andre meme, right? Of like, you say a ridiculous thing, you spout blasphemous things, and I'm not trying to dunk on these guys here. This is applicable to so much in the content sphere beyond just hockey.
Society as a whole.
And then all of a sudden you turn around and someone, it's the whole thing where it's like, freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence of speech. It's like people will say whatever they want, and people are like, I think you're stupid. Yes. And then they're like, how dare you say that to me, right? And I think that's where we struggle, and we see that in the content space more, because it's people sharing their opinions outside of just conversation, but on platform to be presented to folks without the nuance of conversation, right? When you have a really controversial opinion on something, if you say it to someone's face, you discuss back and forth, there's a lot more patience for, you know, having conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with you on the same political spectrum or whatever you want to call it. But when you're just putting it out there, there's no room for that rebuttal and conversation to end up on some form of level playing field of, oh, I understand where you're coming from. I might have phrased it differently. I might disagree, but a little bit more of that comes from conversation. You don't get that when you're putting content out there, and I feel like we've just become so abrasive to all these sorts of different things.
You're totally right, because I find that, like, so obviously spending a lot of time in the U.S., I'm Canadian, and what the U.S. thinks is left versus, like, what Canada thinks is left are two very different things. Like, our right is their left type of situation. And so, like, I often either overhear or are in conversations with people about various things, and I use it as an opportunity to learn, because, like, we are a Westminster parliamentary, like, democracy in Canada. The U.S. is a constitutional republic. Those are not the same thing. And so you're going to have differing opinions. And I'm cool with having those discussions. But if someone looks me across the face and says, the earth is flat, straight up, you're an idiot. Like, we're not having a discussion about that. There is no discussion to be had. But if you want to have an ideological discussion about something, you want to have an opinion on a hockey player. Like, the whole thing about Morgan Riley right now and the season he's having. If you are going to use plus minus as the basis of your analysis, I'm not listening. If you want to say Morgan Riley's having a down season for X, Y, and Z, and also he's minus 22 or whatever he is, fine. But if your opinion starts with he's minus 22, therefore bad, I'm not having that discussion with you, because, like, that is not the basis of positive analysis.
Well, and I think discussion is the key word, right? And I give some credit to my dad in particular, because this is something that I was a pretty argumentative kid growing up, and it was always a thing where if I was arguing with him about something, he would say his piece, and then before I speak, he would immediately cut me off and say, pause, think for a couple seconds, and then speak, because I know that you came up with what you were going to say before you even listened to me speak. You just knew what you wanted to say. Stop, register what I just said, then come up with your answer. And I think that line of thinking is so important, because it's not a discussion. If you have a log of ideas of what you feel, and then you're just waiting for that person to finish their part before you can say your next thing, that's not a discussion. That's just you speaking, two walls speaking to one another, right? And I think that that's so important to understand that a discussion means basing your next answer off of what that other person says, and influenced by your own thoughts and information, obviously, but not just sharing the information that you walked into the conversation with, repackaging it, reinforming it based on what the person is saying. That's a discussion.
I love this. Speaking of discussions, you host Chel Chit Chat, the podcast. And it's an interview series where you talk to various people about, like, basically hockey social topics. So it fits perfectly with what we do here at Puck Social in terms of, like, bringing different stories to light. I'm curious, what you've learned, kind of how it's impacted the way you think and cover hockey, because you've interviewed some really cool people. Like, you interviewed Lauren Kelly about scouting, you interviewed Shayna Goldman, you interviewed Joe, not a fan Joe. If you don't know who that is, then pay more attention. But, you've interviewed Sarah Sivian, like, all these people who have done various different things, and it's not like they've been like insiders. It's like they're actually doing the work. So I'm curious, Chel Chit Chat, like, how has that shaped your perspective? What have you learned? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think where the idea with this whole thing started is that, well, first and foremost, I recognize the privilege I have of having the platform that I do and the connections that I do, and it's unbelievably cool to know as many people as I do and have as many people who are kind of in my corner rooting for me. And I was like, holy smokes, I have learned so much from these folks, and I know that they want me and others to learn as well, like, you know, because they are so established and cool and they have all these things to say. And I was like, okay, why don't we put this out as kind of an asynchronous resource for other people? Because I've learned from the conversations I've had with these people, and I want those conversations to reach more ears, because wow, do these women have cool things to say. But the way I wanted to frame it, and I think it's so important, is that I find that sometimes, and this is not to the detriment of any person that has ever interviewed me or has ever had a conversation with me. Oftentimes, in particular with men, when I speak with them, there's this lens of, well, how does this feel as a woman? And it's so important for me to to acknowledge and say, like, I don't know how it feels as anything but a woman. The stories that I share are from the point of view of a woman, from the experience of a woman. I have been a woman through every step of this process, through every step of everything. So all I know is how to speak about things from the experience as a woman, from the voice of a woman, all these things. So all I want to do is bring these women on and talk about stuff. It's implied that these women have experienced the things that they have as a woman. And of course, we can get into some of the more intricate and specific details of how they think perhaps their experience was shaped by that. But it's just female voices talking about important topics. I like the perspective that they bring to the table about these things, but it's not about, trying to pigeonhole things as, well, how was this as an experience? And then how was this as same experience, but as a woman? Because that's woven in through the entire thing. So I just want to create resources for other people and use people I consider to be experts in the topics that I had them speak on, and just allow people to learn. And they're from the perspectives of people that I think are so unbelievably important and so unbelievably qualified to speak on the things that I brought them on to talk about, all these different how-tos. And, obviously I had a blast doing it, but I think it's so important that, people look to women for advice, insight, things on things in hockey without them being necessarily specifically advice they want through the lens of a woman. It's just good advice. That's it, straight up. So that's why I kind of wanted to start that sort of thing. And so for the first season, brought in a lot of folks to talk about a lot more career specific things. That was kind of what we focused on. But maybe spoiler alerts here, season 2 is going to be coming up in the next few months at some point. And I think that, we're going to start diving into some more intricate stuff in terms of just like living and experiencing hockey as a whole, because it impacts all of us in different ways, whether it be career-wise as a fan, residual stuff that happens around us, and just kind of how to kind of empower yourself a little bit more in that space.
I love it because it's not something where it's a current events thing, right? Where it's like, oh, you can record this and then like it'll be out of, like Steve Dangle's podcast, it has this running joke that like they'll record and then like it's out of date within like 3 hours because of something that happened.
Exactly.
What you have going on is it's almost like a time capsule where somebody could stumble upon this like 3 years from now, and all of it's still going to be relevant because like I hate to say this, but like I'm not confident that we're going to move forward enough as a society that it won't be relevant 3 years from now. In fact, it might be more relevant given where we're going as a society. Little bit concerning. But I think having resources and tools like that, there are so many, like my DMs, I mean, I ended up having to close them, and not for this reason, obviously, for harassment reasons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My DMs used to be littered with young women that were seeking advice, that wanted to break into the industry, and obviously honored and humbled that like, they would ask me that. But to have something like Chel Chit Chat where, like, let's say they're interested in being a reporter, right? The Sarah Sivian episode, in terms of like building out your voice and a brand, or the Shayna episode, would be really helpful to them. If they want to be a scout, like, yes, you could ask me because I do that, but like the Lauren Kelly episode, like, that's going to be super helpful for them. And you never know if having that resource available gives them that little bit of a push to be like, hey, I can do this. And then the reverse side of it is maybe someone who already works in the industry has a bias because they're a man and they don't understand it. Maybe they listen to the show and they're like, hey, I never thought about that. And maybe they approach something differently, and it allows them to get better because they've been offered a different perspective. And I think that's something that's really positive about it, because you're offering a perspective that a lot of people, like, look at Sarah's replies, look at my replies, look at Lauren's replies, look at Shayna's replies. Like, some of the most heinous stuff gets, like, my boyfriend literally doesn't follow me on Twitter because if he saw some of the stuff people said to me, he would lose his mind. And some of these things is like, you listen to the lived experiences of these people who have different experiences than you, and maybe you have a better appreciation for some of the things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and maybe you're a little bit kinder.
Well, exactly. And I think the other thing is the whole, it's kind of similar to the concept of a train the trainer approach, where it's like, okay, say you did leave your DMs open and you get all these messages, the more someone gets established in their career and the larger platform they follow, the harder it is to manage that. People get a lot of DMs, especially, you know, influential women in sport. Like, their DMs are flooded and these people are exhausted. And if you can channel that energy into a single 45-minute interview, all of a sudden, instead of answering 100 DMs, you have 100 people listening to this asynchronous particular episode on something, and you've still shared that wealth with people in a way that's so much more sustainable for you. And that's part of the reason that I think this sort of thing is so important, and that's why I try and make the content that I make, and a lot of women try to make the content that they make, is because I'm fortunate that, you know, right now, with the capacity that I have and with, you know, the limited platform that I have, you know, I'm very thankful for what I do have, but let's be real, it's not the same as a Megan Chaika, and that's okay. I'm okay. I answer all the DMs that I get.
Like,
totally
incredible.
Fine. Right. Exactly. So I'm like, I can do that, and I can put together the time, and I can schedule in these calls with you, and I can spend hours editing these episodes and building this brand up because I can do that. All I need from you is just this donation of your time that is maybe 45 minutes for you, but holy smokes, do I have the capacity to turn that into something that's worth hours and hours and hours of your time? But I have the ability to take the wealth of knowledge that you have and put it out onto this platform, and that's really fun for me, and it's a really cool way to amplify the insights that these women have to offer.
Speaking of what women have to offer, it sounds like the PWHL might be going west to Vancouver. We got rumors of that. I absolutely love the success that the PW is having. It's long overdue. I was an intern for the CWHL, way back when. Like, I was working in the office the day the NWHL got announced, and that was an interesting day at the office, I'll tell you that for free. But like, okay, what do you think this means for the PWHL growth-wise? I mean, holy moly, like, we're talking about an entirely different level of travel at that point. Like, as somebody who used to go back and forth to Vancouver, like, that's a 5-hour flight. Like, that's no joke. But I guess because these women don't have to have, like, the full-time jobs on the side, like, you don't got to go to an office job and then go to practice at night. Like, they're full-time jobs now. Like, do we think that this is sustainable? Like, how do we see this playing out?
Yeah, that's definitely was the first kind of, concern's not the right word, but even last year when people were talking about, like, cities for expansion, when people started talking about that, that was my first question mark, right? Is because right now, Minnesota is obviously still significantly closer than Vancouver, but those teams are all kind of within the same realm of travel. You can do some joint road trip and all that sort of stuff. And so I do find it fascinating. And that's why I thought personally that if the league were to expand to, 2 teams or whatever it was, I was thinking like a Chicago or a Detroit, something like that within that
Pittsburgh
sort of
makes
same
a ton
area.
of sense, especially given Crosby's
Right, exactly.
full-throated support of women's hockey.
Exactly, yeah. And it makes a lot more sense in terms of like travel costs, not just travel time. Like that's a huge piece of it as well. And the burden, perhaps unfair advantage of those particular players. It exists in the NHL right now with, teams like Edmonton who have to travel to Vegas and Anaheim to play within division, whereas teams like Pittsburgh have to just jump, over to Philadelphia pretty easily to play the equivalent games. I do understand that discrepancy
New York, New
already
Jersey, and
exists
New York.
Exactly. Some of the guys live closer to rinks that they don't even play for then, right? And so there is discrepancy that exists in other professional hockey leagues. I acknowledge that. But I mean, look at the AHL. They are also a professional hockey league and they basically only play within division, right? Like they don't travel. The Manitoba Moose don't play against the Charlotte Checkers, right? Like these are the travel costs and logistics are a very real thing in sports leagues everywhere. So I do find it a little bit fascinating, but I mean, the league is run by some of the smartest people in hockey, so they're considering all this and so much more, right? So the fact that these rumors are getting as much, discussion as they are means that there's probably some validity to them, and the league would only expand to this if they really thought that there was a path to sustainability there. And so it'll be interesting to see, and there's a new women's soccer league starting up in Canada. The NSL is starting this year, and they have teams in Halifax and Vancouver and everywhere in between, so maybe that's a model that they could look to as well and see what makes sense for that. I think this is a league that is showing a lot of promise in terms of its ability for growth. I went to a game in January of last year, so just, 14 months ago, and it set a record for the most people ever attending a women's hockey game at 13,000. That record has doubled in the last 14 months, right? Like, this is something that is continuously growing and moving in the right trajectory. So I'm definitely excited about the possibility for that. My hope would just be that perhaps if they're expanding to maybe 8 teams or something, that they look at something like a Seattle or whatever, something else in that same region to maybe kind of try and level out the playing field. And perhaps if they expand even more the next year, to maybe have some conferences so that there's a little bit more of that, geographical logic there. I think that might be a better kind of path or whatnot, but I have full faith in the folks that run the PW, so I'm excited to see what kind of happens there.
Yeah, it almost feels like if you're going to add Vancouver, you probably need to go back to Calgary as well. Calgary was a super successful CWHL franchise. I think that they definitely have the fan base to do that there. And when you have that kind of thing, I do think that there's an opportunity there. I think Pittsburgh and Detroit are almost no-brainers. Because Detroit, like, you get the Windsor area, you get all of Michigan. And the thing is like, let's be very honest, like, people who can't afford to go to NHL games, like, they're going to PWHL games. Like, a Toronto Maple Leafs game is like $800 to go to. I can go to a PWHL game for like $100, like, including food and getting there. Like, and it's fantastic hockey. So I think that there's like a little bit of that too. My hope is, like, if the PW goes to Vancouver, number one, I think it will be successful from a fan perspective. But I really hope the Aquilinis aren't involved in any way, shape, or form. Because I think that there's a legitimate opportunity to have some of the Canucks fans, and I will give them a ton of credit for this. When the team is bad and they know that management and ownership are the issue, they just stop showing up. Like, they just literally like, yeah, we're not coming. We'll go watch the Vancouver Giants, right? Well, if you put a PW team there, now instead of going to the Canucks games, they're like, we'll go watch Vancouver PWHL. Like, that's kind of one of those things where I'm like, I actually think that it will be good for the Vancouver hockey sphere if the PW goes there, because the Canucks are not one of those teams where, like, the Leafs, like, people are going to show up no matter what. Same like the Habs, right? People will stop showing up. And I saw that with my own eyes when I worked there. And I think what you'll see is there's still a want for hockey, they will watch and support the PWHL. And I would love to see that happen.
Healthy
and I
competition is really important.
And you could also have a partnership with Cami Granato, who's in the Hockey Hall of Fame as a women's hockey player. Like, there's so much that you could do with that because Cami is in the Hall of Fame. Like, that matters. And so I love that. I would love to see PW expansion. It seems like the league is in a really healthy way right now, like, between sponsorships, attendance. Like, the Scepters in Toronto, I know, like, I've been to, like, 4 or 5 games, sold out, all of them. Like, people are going to games in the way that they don't go watch the Steelheads play. They don't go watch the Marlies play. Like, people are interested, and there's a ton of women that want something to look up to. And as a parent, like, it's far more affordable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost barrier is a huge part, specifically in the markets that they're already in, right? Like, Toronto tickets are expensive, Boston tickets are expensive, New York, obviously. And I think the huge thing is that a lot of folks are, comparing it to, like, other hockey in the area, but I think what's so important is to distinguish between the fact that, you know, like, it's the highest level of the sport that it is. Whereas, you know, you go to watch an AHL game, it's a watered-down version of other leagues, right? You're not getting the best 18, 19-year-olds because they're not allowed to play there. You're not getting the NHL players because they're playing somewhere else. All these things. The women's hockey sphere, like, this is the highest level that there is of a different sport. Men's hockey and women's hockey are not the same. They have different rules. It's a different playing field. Like, it's not the same product. So you are getting the best version of this product. And you could argue that, of course, junior hockey is not the same as NHL, but there are lots of folks who prefer junior hockey over watching NHL hockey. I totally respect that because there is a huge difference. Right. No, exactly. So it's one of those things that it's like there are a lot of people who would choose to go to a Mississauga Steelheads game over a Toronto Maple Leafs game. And those are, you know, the same category of people that would choose to go to a Toronto Scepters game over XYZ other thing because that is what they prefer and that is the product that they like. And I think that's a narrative that it's super important to remember is very real. It's not just that, well, this is the only game that people can afford to go to or this is the only game that people can XYZ. No, people want to go there. This is a choice that people are choosing to support this sport, this league, these players, and I think it's important to ride with that.
All right, let's get into our Lifeline. So, Jacob Chychrun signed a long-ass contract extension with the Washington Capitals for $9 million, which is a lot of money for a guy who might miss time because he poisoned himself with raw milk. But we need to talk about a few things. Number one, this man removed the lights from his house and is using candles for some God knows what reason. But number two, the fact that he signed, I think it's an 8-year contract extension, allows some stability for his family. Like, I don't think people understand. When you sign a giant contract extension, your wife can now go out and find a job because she knows she's going to be there. What is the purpose of Jacob's wife going and trying to find a job when he could be moving to a city in July or August? Like, there's literally 0 point in doing that. And so I think that's part of it is, like, what's it like as a spouse when you're like, wow, I can actually, like, hang out with the Wags and, like, not worry about getting traded and, like, I can get a job if I want to. Because when your husband makes $9 million, you might not have to. But also, you might need to because your husband spends all his money on things like liver and candles and
beeswax candles or whatever.
First of all, do you know how expensive beeswax candles are? Someone tried it, they're like,
no,
oh,
because
I
use incandescent light bulbs like a normal person. I don't know how much beeswax candles cost.
I was like, I like this candle. I was at a farmer's market. I use lights, okay? I use lights. Actually, extremely funny. This is a bone of contention between Nick and I. So when I watch, like, Bayern Munich play soccer or any, like, sports team, I watch it with the lights off because I don't want glare on the TV. I don't want distractions. I sit in the dark and I watch. He comes home. He fires on every single light in the house. Like, and I'm just like, come on.
That's so funny. I'm Team Nick. I'm a lights
You're Team
on
Lights?
watching
God
sports
damn,
person. the screen is too bright otherwise. Like, if there's glare is priority number one, is to get that out of there. Like, I'll close curtains if the sun is out and reflecting on the TV and stuff, but, like, I don't like watching even a movie in the pitch black, because I'm just like, it's so aggressive on my face, which is funny. I literally have a ring light, blue light shining in my face right now, but this is for a purpose. Like, I if I can have some other light on when watching something, I'm going to. So, I'm on team.
Okay, so I was at the farmer's market, and this lady was selling these beeswax candles, and I was like, damn, these smell really good. I want them. $400. And I was like, yo, what?
What?
$400 for a candle.
That's insane.
I was like, yo.
I never would have guessed that.
Yeah, no. She had smaller ones, and they were $50, and I was like, I'm not doing that. So apparently the ones you get at White Barn are not beeswax candles, because... yeah. So Jacob Chikrin is using beeswax candles to light his entire God knows how big house. I guarantee you that's more expensive than whatever his hydro bill is.
Oh my gosh, that's actually nuts.
But, like, did you see Bryce Harper missed opening of MLB training camp?
He's an odd guy.
Of raw milk? He got food poisoning from raw milk.
I just can't get on board with it, because it falls into a similar category about how I feel about media. And, like, bear with me for a second, because I sound crazy. But the whole idea of, like, rejecting modern things just for the sake of rejecting them is crazy to me. I completely understand that if there's some form, like, well, yeah, like research or whatever, like a lot of things to do with, like, blue light and how it affects your eyes, and how kids are becoming more, like, nearsighted because they don't spend as much time outside and their depth perception is not developed. Like, there's, like, legitimate research that goes into a lot of stuff, but it's the whole concept of, like, however long ago, 100 years ago, when, you know, we were dealing with communist Russia, people were like, hey, maybe we should be careful about what we believe from media. And it's like, hey, great thought. But all of a sudden, 100 years later, this has turned into, well, actually nothing the media says can be true. And it's like, whoa, we lost the plot somewhere along the way. Because that's not where we wanted to end up here.
Yeah, like, people are like, I read this on Facebook, and I'm like, are you okay? Like,
exactly. And so where we get with this whole, like, no vaccinations, no artificial red dye 40, whatever, all these things, like, there is definitely some conversation to be had about what technology and processed stuff has done at XYZ, but it's like, not because something wasn't a thing 500 years ago, it doesn't mean it's bad. I promise you that. I can promise you that. Just because it was a thing 500 years ago doesn't mean it's bad.
My favorite
right? Like,
tweet
this is a real thing.
My favorite tweet in, like, the last, like, 4 months has been, like, we survived the Black Plague without vaccines, and the first reply underneath it was, 1/3 of the world's population died. Like,
right. Exactly. Bro. That's the whole thing with all this sort of stuff where it's like, people are like, oh yeah, well, like, people didn't used to have XYZ. It's like, people used to die a lot more than they die now. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind.
On a daily basis. Like, on a daily basis. Like, it's... So, Jacob Chikrin gets his contract, gets his bag, is gonna buy all the candles you could possibly imagine, all the $500 candles, that man's all over it, and he's gonna eat all the, like, raw liver and, like, all manner of craziness. All I'm gonna say is this. Jacob, the average hockey player, and actually, not even the average hockey player. Every single really, really talented hockey player does not have a college degree. Most of them didn't go to post-secondary education at all, and if we're being super honest, they weren't really forced to do proper work in high school either. I know so many NHL players that didn't go to a single grade 11 or 12 math class and miraculously passed. So I'm not going to be taking the opinions of anybody in the National Hockey League as it pertains to science, because odds are if I put a grade 8 science test in front of them, they would fail it. So this is the thing.
Well, that's always the thing, right? With Jacob Chikrin, it's that, okay, if this is the life you want to choose to lead, everyone's entitled to do what they want to do with themselves, whatever. The issue I have with people like that fall into the same realm in terms of beliefs, and I don't know if Jacob Chikrin applies to this, because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a relationship with this guy. Never met him, never talked to him. If he's turning around and saying, well, then you all should, that's where I draw the line. You know, it's like, okay, exactly. Let's chill. If you just want to mind your own and do your thing, you know what? Okay. Enjoy your beeswax candles, enjoy your natural sunlight and your, no added preservatives or whatever you want. That's okay. But as soon as you start acting holier than thou, that's when I struggle with it. And I cannot speak to what side of that spectrum Jacob Chikrin falls on. So jury's still out for me on how I feel about that. But if he's going to turn around and tell Alex Ovechkin that he can't drink Dr. Pepper anymore, we're not friends.
We're out, because you know who's a better hockey player than Jacob Chikrin? Alex Ovechkin. Like, I can come. You know what? It's so funny, though, because you have guys like Jacob Chikrin, and Dylan Strome was literally making fun of him on a podcast. He's like, there are lights in the hockey rink, my man. Like, what are we doing? But there's guys like Jacob Chikrin who are like, I need to do this, and cell phone 5G nonsense, like whatever. And then Alex Ovechkin rocks up with a Subway sandwich and a Dr. Pepper, and the guy's about to break Wayne Gretzky's goal record. Like, okay, I can comfortably say, after asking Bruce Boudreau a ton of questions about Alex Ovechkin, that man has some of the worst diet habits in the National Hockey League. So something tells me, and it might not be like, I'm not saying everyone should be drinking Dr. Pepper and eating Subway every day, but all I'm saying is I don't necessarily think we also need to be eating liver and not having lights in our house either. I think there's like a happy
There's always a happy medium. There's always a happy medium between everything. And that's been the bit of the show, right? Is that it's like there's always, it's never that extreme. That's always what it is. You can, it's okay. It's fine.
It's not that serious. Like, I'm with you. Like, if you want to drink your raw milk and eat your liver, go right ahead. Number one, don't tell me to do that. The moment you're telling people about vaccines and how they're bad, I understand skepticism with COVID, given how it was handled. I still got like 6 shots. But when we're talking about measles coming back, when we had eradicated that from the planet because people don't want to vaccinate their kids, then I'm drawing the line, because that actually impacts the rest of society. You drinking raw milk doesn't impact me at all. But if if I am around somewhere that has measles, and then I go around a baby who hasn't been vaccinated yet, and that kid dies, that's a problem. And it's because your dumb ass doesn't believe in science that happened 80 years ago. Like,
it's why we have lanes on the highway. I completely acknowledge that if you were driving there by yourself, you could go wherever you want down that path and it would be fine. We have lanes because sometimes our actions impact other people, and that's what we have to do.
But, yeah, like, I'm willing to have conversation about, like, the medical field, especially because I have a master's of science. Like, I understand, like, you have to have different conversation, and there's new research that says, like, hey, this is bad, or, like, XYZ. There are also people in this world that have allergic reactions to vaccines who obviously can't get them for safety reasons. That's different. But when you're telling me that the polio vaccination doesn't work, like, that's not the same as using candles in your house. Like, yeah, that's not the same as using candles in your house. Because your candle situation doesn't impact me.
Right.
Like, that's it, right? As a society, we need to... This is, Lyss, and I think you and I, we talk about this all the time. As a society, where did we get to where we literally looked at the person next to us and is like, I don't give a crap about you? Like,
yep.
How do you just not care about anybody but yourself? Like, I don't get it.
It's the whole concept of, like, the I need to put me first, whatever mentality of, like, actually you do have obligations when you live in a society. We benefit from the trades of goods and services every single day. That's how you have a house over your head. That's how you have food on your table, is because we live in, whether you want to call it capitalism, whether you want to call it society in general, trades of goods and services is how community and living in the proximity and in engagement with other people has existed forever and always. And it's not always material. Sometimes it's emotional in how we treat other people. And, like, you do have an obligation to be a good person to other people. And even if I can't tangibly tell you what the exact output of that is and how it benefits you, you got to do it anyway. Sorry if that bothers you.
Exactly. It's not, when we live in a society, Listen, if you want to go live in in solitude, and you don't want to interact with society at all, and you want to get your groceries delivered, and you never want to leave your house, you do whatever you want. I don't care. The moment you start relying on social services, like the hospital, like the doctor, like going out in public to a restaurant, you have a responsibility to be a decent human being, whether that is how you treat the waitress, how you treat the doctor, not taking public transit and coughing all over people. Don't do that. And if you're going to do that, I understand. Cars are not affordable for everybody. That's totally fine. Masks are free. And if you have freaking strep throat and you aren't wearing a mask and I get strep throat because of it, like last week I got sick. And why was it? It's because some not very nice person was right beside my head and coughed. And I got sick literally the next day. And I was like, that is how I got sick. You have a responsibility as a member of society to not be a douche canoe. Don't do that. That is Lifeline. We covered candles and society. I mean, that's what we do, right, Liz?
Oh my gosh, it's a funny thing. Like, so I do a show on Sundays called WST Sunday Live with my co-host Connor and Jacob, and I took a screen recording of one of our episodes a couple of weeks ago because I was like, this perfectly embodies the entirety of not just our show but my life. Because Connor's like, okay, I have a thing with that. He's like, and I want to know if you guys have time for this argument. And immediately my face kind of lights up, and Jacob's like, what are you talking about? Liz has time for every argument, because I am always down to shoot the shit and talk about, like, you know, how we feel about things and how, you know, things impact one another, and turning everything into like a theory, because I always have a theory, and it's always trying to talk about like logic that flows its way through life, and whether it stems from hockey or not, I can always find a way to make it about hockey regardless.
We're gonna have Liss's Theory Corner next time you're on.
Oh my god. You don't want that, I promise.
I love it. No, like that's I love having these conversations though, because it's like we talked about earlier, there are certain things you can have a discussion about. Being a good human being is not one of those things. You either are or you aren't. It is like that, I feel like, is very black and white. You are a good human or you are not. That there's no room for error or discussion there. Like, Mike and I had this conversation.
I could have a discussion about it. I could have a conversation about it, because I always can.
Drunk driving? Like,
never mind. Not
don't do it. Like, that, you have a societal contract not to do that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That's what it is. The societal contract. That might have to be the name of this episode. And with that, we are done for this episode of Puck Social. Liz, you need to fire off every single place where people can find your work, because I am not kidding. All of Liss's content is incredible, and it's not just Chel Chit Chat.
Well, thank you. I do love to make my content, so I obviously Chel Chit Chat is the big one that I'm plugging right now, because I am very proud of that project and so thankful for all the women who've jumped on with me and will jump on with me in future seasons. Nothing to say here.
No comment.
And so that's available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. Also post about it over on Instagram and Twitter. And then my own personal stuff, my TikTok page is where I talk about all kinds of different things as it pertains to hockey. A lot of career stuff, a lot of just hockey stuff in general, trying to lower the barriers to entry of being a fan. Because over on my page, as long as you're not being a dick, you can be a fan however you want to be a fan, right? And then on Twitter is where I talk mostly about Winnipeg Jet stuff. Where on my page we uphold our societal contracts to one another. That's exactly what goes on there. And then my Twitter is at Lyss Houde, and that's where I'm most active in the hockey space. So you'll find me plugging my work and talking about all kinds of fun things, including Jacob Chikrin's beeswax candles over there.
I love it. This is the Beeswax podcast now. All right, Les, thank you so much for joining us on Puck Social. And by us, I mean me, because Mike is deathly ill because probably somebody didn't hold up their societal
coughed on
contract.
Him on the bus.
So that's honestly, yeah, that probably is what happened.
Well, it wasn't somebody at the movie theater, because he goes to that by himself.
No, that man sits alone in a movie theater. I asked him, like, let's go see a movie. He's like, no, I don't go with people. I'm like, all right, Batman, calm down. All right, we'll be back next Friday with a brand new episode, and hopefully Mike is alive. Anyways, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you.
If not, I'll have more theories.
Yes!